Joining us on phone now is the General Manager, the Public Affairs, Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, Sam Adurogboye. Sam, it's good to have you join us right now.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, sir.
All right, now talk to us. When the Harmattan sets in, a lot of people feel that the weather is supposed to be or feels clearer, but in the aviation world, it seems not to be the same. Talk to us. How more difficult is the weather for aviation during the Harmattan season?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Harmattan is part of the weather condition, which is a natural phenomenon. And if I may say it, no, which is a natural phenomenon. And if I may say it, no man has control over the weather. What man has been able to do is to come up with some equipment or gadgets to be able to determine the presence, the movement, and be able to plan the movement and go safely accordingly. All over the world, weather is an issue when it comes to aircraft, because aircraft is built to fly in a stable atmosphere, and weather is one of the issues that make the atmosphere not stable. And that is where man has come up with technology to determine the presence. So it's an issue all over the world. But we have been able to conquer by way of advancing ourselves accordingly and program our movement safely.
Okay, so then what are the measures in place to ensure that Nigeria does not record any kind of mishap because of the weather situation? We do hear that every aircraft actually has a maximum operating temperature set by the manufacturer and regulated by, the regulators. What are the things that you have in place now to ensure that we don't have any issues?
Well, one of the major things we have in place is to keep sensitizing ourselves. And with that sensitization, the idea is to let people know their own responsibilities. The idea is to let the operator know what they need to do, and of course, for the travelers to know that whatever is being done is for their own safety, and for everybody to know what to do and what to expect. But that is the practice all over the world. Weather is an issue. It's not peculiar to Nigeria.
Yeah, we do understand that, but how much can I, as a traveler, do to ensure that, when I travel by air, that I'm safe, that I'll take off from A and land at B where I want to?
Exactly what we have just said, by sensitizing the public that in this period of the year, the Harmattan haze is here with us. It's not going to be friendly. Once it is established that it is there, your flight may be delayed, your flight may be cancelled, and once this happens, we expect the airlines to get across to their passengers on time so that they will not even need to come to the airport. But when they have come to the airport, before these changes occur, then they need to, it becomes their own responsibility to put the passengers in the air in the hotel if they are international passengers. But all these measures are taken so that you will know that what is happening is not untoward, it's just to guarantee safety. But we have had good news is that we have equipment that is able to forecast it through the NIMET. They tell us they tell us ahead of time. And of course, we make it mandatory for the operators to obtain those information and be briefed accordingly and know what to do. This is exactly what we are saying, that people should know at this time of the year, the weather is here, the Harmattan is here, and of course, we have to plan our movement within the region or where it is safe to go.
All right, Sam Adurogboye, General Manager, Public Affairs, Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority. Thank you for talking to us this morning on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now let's move to Skype now. We have Dr. Dung Rangpam joining us. He's a pilot. Thanks for joining us right now, Dung. It's good to have you. And we also have on Skype an environmentalist, Desmond Majekodumi, Director of the Global Initiative for Food Security and Ecosystem Preservation. Thank you for joining us. And David Michael will be joining us from Abuja later on the show as well. But let me start with you, Dr. Pam. You are a pilot, and When it comes to weather, I know that you have seen different kinds of extreme and regular and normal weather across the world from your flying. But what precaution do you take when you hear of weather before you take off?
Well, weather is a phenomena that we have to contend with. And as a result of that, even in the design, manufacture, and operations of aircraft, systems are put in place to be able to mitigate the adverse effects of weather. And for instance, for us here in West Africa, we have to contend with the northeast trade winds, popularly called the harmattan, that brings the dust from the Sahara Desert and impairs our visibility to levels where we need to be able to take precautions. So as far as I'm concerned, this is actually very mild compared to the kind of weather you find in other places like the Far East, where you have typhoons, and in the Northern Hemisphere, where you have severe icing and very strong winds. So for us, at the equatorial region especially, this is very mild, something that we can just take care of by putting in place instrument landing systems that will allow us to land in poor visibility, because that is the usual, adverse condition that we need to contend with. And we know that it comes around this time of the year, somewhere between November and March. We have to contend with the harmattan haze. And I think the government, from all indications, have the opportunity and the facilities to mitigate this adverse condition.
All right, let me stay with you, Dong. There have been reports that the control towers have most of the equipment really are faulty. You are a pilot, you would understand. Now, when you have that kind of situation, and then you have a bad weather to contend with as a pilot, there's a regulator on the other hand. Who takes the final responsibility as to whether to fly, or even whether they should land when you come, when you hit a bad situation?
Of course, the final responsibility of either to take off in the first place to a place where you're not sure about the weather conditions, or to land when you get to a place where the weather has changed, rests with the flight crew, especially the captain and the co-pilot. They are the ones who make the decision whether it is safe enough for them to land. Now, let me just, not to sound like a broken record, but I'd like to just take you back to something that I wrote about 13 years ago. And this was in February 18, 2005. At that time, the MD of NAMA, it's a young gentleman called Emperor Onasanya. And at that time, he was telling us, because then I was the chairman of the Nigerian Aviation Safety Initiative, that they are putting in place facilities to ensure Category 3 ILS in Lagos and Abuja. Category 3 allows you to land when visibility is as low as 200 meters. 200 meters. You should be able to land safely. This is 2005, so that is at least 13 years from now. So we know that we have the facilities at the moment, and about 2 months ago, the government actually said that they have installed ILS Category 3 in Lagos and Abuja, which makes a lot of sense. The thing is this: has this equipment been tested? Have the pilots been informed? Because you cannot just go on Category 3 landing without training. And also, there's so many little things that I think the government is ignoring. But unfortunately, we have come to a head again. Harmattan is here, and we're not ready for low visibility procedures. So this is the conundrum that we face.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll come back to you. Let's bring on Desmond Majakudumi, an environmentalist, joining us also on Skype. Now, Desmond, it's good to have you join us. Now, when it comes to the climate change that everyone has been talking about, and weather and so on, one would say that from all the conventions that the world has been convening over the years, whether the countries have actually taken the right action towards reducing greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide in the air, and as well as working towards the reduction of ozone layer depletion and all of that. How much progress has the world made so far? Desmond?
Well, it looks like the weather is getting in the way already. Okay, let's take it to David Michael in Abuja. He's director of the Global Initiative for Food Security and Ecosystem Preservation. Thank you so much, David Michael. Let's even take it from, your area of interest, which is food security and ecosystem preservation. What, for the individual and, of course, at the governmental level should be done really to mitigate the impact of climate change? The president, of course, has been in Poland, in the COP24 conference, and he's been talking about the need for international and global cooperation when it comes to dealing with the challenges of climate change.
Yes, thank you for having me. It is good that the president is in Paris, was at Paris rather, and now in Poland. The truth is attending these conventions and meetings is important, but what is more important is critical actions on the ground. Climate change is already here. It is affecting our people. In my area of specialization, food security, our people are already affected. So we need to help our people adapt to the changing climate. And that is what is more important. We already know what happened this year and even years before. The flooding this year affected the most vulnerable people, who majority of them are farmers. Now they depend largely on rainfall. There's change in rainfall patterns, and this affects when to plant and all that. So there is need to help our people to adapt to a changing planet. And this is more important when we start planning, because that is what we are not doing at the moment.
Yeah, in practical terms, what kind of plans would you like to see so that we don't have, food security issues and, the challenges with the Lake Chad Basin, for example, and all of that we're already experiencing?
So invest in climate smart agricultural practices. Help our people carry out a vulnerability mapping of the country. So we know that climate change is affecting everywhere. So our people know that in these areas you can farm, in these areas you cannot, because it's on floodplains, and when the flood comes, they'll wash away your farms and everything. So, but more importantly, we also need to have a climate change bill passed in the country. The climate change bill is still at the National Assembly since, I think, 1999. I mean, there is need to harmonize what the ministries are doing. The Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Power, the Ministry of Petroleum, for example. We are a fossil fuel dependent country. It means that we contribute again to these issues. But if we leave everything to the Ministry of Environment as we do now.
When it comes to weather, you mentioned West Africa earlier on. How peculiar is our weather at this time of the year, differently from other places in the world, as a pilot?
Well, sorry, Micah. I have to correct an impression. I'm not a doctor. My initials are D and R, which is Dung Rung, and the surname is Pam.
Oh, okay. Sorry for giving you a title in there. Well, it's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Like I said, the weather we have in Nigeria is fantastic. And in most of West Africa, so to say, because we're close to the equator. We don't have strong winds that other people, whether in the north or south, have to contend with. during their winters especially. We don't have lots of typhoons. We don't have lots of earthquakes. So we're really, really lucky where we are situated and located. The only thing we have to contend with over the past 40 years is just this dust haze that comes from the Sahara Desert between November and March. And all we need to do is to have equipment that can allow us to land in time when visibility drops to about, say, 300 meters. It hardly gets worse than that. And I was really impressed when the government mentioned that they have had those facilities installed in Abuja and Lagos. The thing is that this has not really followed through. To follow that through, they need to ensure that the equipment is calibrated. They need to ensure that the airlines are informed well ahead of time so that they can send their crew for training, and if possible, have extra equipment that are needed to be able to make landings with those new equipment that have been installed on ground. So we are really very lucky. We have absolutely no excuse. And the fact that people like me have been aware of this for the past, say, 22 years, and we have spoken about it in at least, almost every single year, because it happens, and flights are canceled for some time. And airlines, I remember way back 2004, at that time, they said they lost about 150 million within the 3 days that we had that very low visibility. So you can imagine the horrendous losses airlines are suffering in times like this. I think it shows as if the government is insensitive, or they are not serious to, ensure that we emerge as a country that is able to practice sustainable aviation. If airlines are making huge losses and making cancellations at this time for over 15 years, then we are not really ready.
All right, let's bring in environmentalist Desmond Maja-Kodumi. He was on Skype earlier, but he's on phone now because we had issues with the weather. Okay. Desmond, now this is for you. That seems to be a major challenge, really, but how to preserve the environment for future generations. And research shows that Africa and less developed countries actually are the receiving end of the climate change problem. What can we really begin to do beyond these conferences, COP24, and the different ones that have happened before now, to actually, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing, like anything else, it has to start in our mind. We have to get into our consciousness the reality that what we call environment is actually our life support system. Obviously, everything that we rely on for our survival comes from the ecosystem of planet Earth. A miracle, a miraculous poetry of different patterns, of gases, of different frequencies, of different elements that all give us our life support. Like this harmattan that we're talking about. It's a process. It's a process that comes and goes, just like the rain is a process. It's not just automatic. There are processes that drive these things. And unfortunately, we as human beings, and sadly, not so much the Africans, but the rest of the world, particularly the Europeans, Americans, and now the Chinese, have been pouring massive amounts of poison into this wonderful, miraculous ecosystem that is our life support system, particularly the poison of carbon dioxide through burning of fossil fuels. I mean, the reality is that you would not stay in a room with the generator inside the room, would you? Because you know what would happen? It would kill you, the poison, the toxins that come out. Do you know that we're pumping millions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every single day? And it is now impacting terribly against us. That's why they're having this conference. And you did mention, talk at the conference, but at least they're talking about it. In days gone by, they didn't even talk about it. But now we need to have very definitive action, particularly because we are so vulnerable in Africa. It's a sad irony. Our contribution to the poison, to the CO2 particularly, has been far, far, far less. Yet we are already feeling the effects of this climate change And it is bound to get far worse unless we get into our minds, into our collective consciousness, that we, as human beings, are the species that is put here to care for the creation. You know, this thing of having dominion and dominance over the creation doesn't mean that we should destroy it, because it is our life support system. And finally, it's not just our life support system, and we need to get this into our heads. It's our children's life support systems.
All
so
right.
We need to care.
Okay. Desmond Majekudumi, environmentalist, thank you so much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast. Let's bring back Dung Rampam on Skype with us. He's a pilot. Now, Dung, how much of the knowledge of what the weather is like, how much of it should the passenger on the plane know before he travels?
I think it behoves on the passengers to also be cognizant of the effects of the weather. And basically, there are applications. Most people have mobile phones. There are applications now that you can just go to and look at weather at almost any airport in the world, as well as most of the media stations, for instance, TVC and other stations. They also give weather reports. And I would expect that the passengers who intend to travel should pay attention to that and look at that. Look at those sources of weather, especially the forecasting, which is called a terminal aerodrome forecast, that gives the weather for the next 30 hours. That will help them better than just waking up in the day and preparing for the flight and then to look at the weather on that day. It's quite easy to find applications, like I said, or go online to check for the weather. So that is my advice in order to avoid such unfortunate disruptions.
All right, Dung Rampam, thank you very much. Dung Rampam is a pilot, of course, giving us this perspective as, you know, the airline industry is affected by changes in the weather pattern. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's go back to David Michael, who is Director of Global Initiative for Food Security and Ecosystem. President Buhari, before now, he's been, you know, trying to draw attention to the, you know, challenge with the Lake Chad basin, where about 40 million people actually depend on, and he's been calling for global action, you know, for that. And then on the other hand, we've had herdsmen, farmers, you know, clashes over and over again that has been traced to climate change. What are the things that you see going forward in terms of really tackling this problem? Yeah, it seems like it's similar to the question I asked you earlier, but in practical terms, I mean, it bears emphasizing again and again what government really needs to do to take action.
David?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The Lake Chad has dried up practically, and the issues with the farmers and herdsmen. What can the government do? The plan on ranching is a good one. The population is increasing. The land has remained the same. And the more we increase in population, the land will never increase, except we will have to fight Cameroon and Niger to expand. But what we can do with what we have is that we introduce good, smart agricultural practices to our people to use the small piece of land they have to produce more, other than using 5-10 hectares and producing barely nothing. This will reduce this conflict between herdsmen and farmers and the competition over land and water. Our people, we need to come up with ways to preserve our food. There's too much food waste in the country. If you know how much tomatoes are produced in the country, in Benue, in Jos, and many cannot be preserved. After 2-3 days, they go to waste. And so we shouldn't be having issues of food security if we can process and preserve our food properly. This is ways of helping our people adapt to these issues. So the issue is not just attending conferences and signing agreements, but the work is here on ground. Our people are seriously being affected already by these issues. So the government need to take a step further to bring up very good initiatives that will help our people adapt to the changing climate.
All right, David Michael, Director, Global Initiative for Food Security and Ecosystem Preservation. Thank you for talking to us on TVC Breakfast. And we also thank all our guests earlier on who joined us from different places on Skype and also on phone.